everyone, my name is Maddie, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my July wrap-up. So I have no idea whether wrap-ups are going to be a regular thing I do or not, but I read a lot in July, so although all of these books I think pretty much have been mentioned in various vlogs, I thought I'd do a wrap-up anyway. We're going to try and keep this short and sweet. We're going to try and just like rattle through all the books I read and just give you some idea of what I read and how I found them. So for starters, how much did I read in July? I don't have a ton of stats, but I've just done some quick maths and I read 3,733 pages across 12 books in July. 4 of those were manga, but 8 were like novels, so I don't know how I did that. I have said a million times my reading is so variable. I fluctuate between reading loads and reading very little. Though I have found in the last couple of months I feel like I'm reading more. I chat backstage with Christy all the time and we do sprints like any day we're both free, which to be honest ends up being 3 or 4 times a week, which definitely makes me read so much more. And we don't always read on sprints, but it's definitely made a massive difference. So let's rattle through these 12 books as quickly as we can and I'll give you some very brief thoughts. And I will link down below all of my vlogs from the month and I'll list next to them which books are in which vlogs so that if you do want a bit more detail you can go and watch those. So starting off, the first book I finished in July was Babel by R.F. Kuang. I really enjoyed this. I think this is going to end up as like a 4-star for me. I'm not great at rating books. I feel like I had to sit with them for quite a while. But this is probably the book I least anticipated picking up within the next sort of year. I was so intimidated by this. Everyone loves it and I was so nervous to pick it up because I thought it was this big academic scary book. So I'm putting it off for ages and then for some unknown reason at 11 PM one day I decided I wanted to read it and picked it up and then read it pretty rapidly from then. This follows Robin, who is a boy that's brought over from China to England in sort of the 1800s, I want to say. Yeah, 1800s. And is brought over as like a ward of this very like rich, important professor and is told to like learn the art of language and translation, and there's magic from this and secret societies and a lot of commentary on what the world was like at that time with regards to race and class, etc. It was a super interesting read. I did really enjoy it. I found it really ebbed and flowed in terms of was there a lot of plot happening or was there very little plot happening. And there were definitely sections of this book I found significantly slower versus some where I was like absolutely gripped. So a little bit of a mixed bag, but overall I really enjoyed it and I personally loved the slightly academic tone of like loads of detail on language and how that all works. So a good read, really like solid, fun, enjoyable, interesting, but wasn't necessarily like gripping the entire way through. Next up was the first manga I read of the month, which was Star Collector. This is the first in a duology and I probably will pick up the sequel at some point. This is just a really sweet little manga following these 2 boys, one of whom is a bit of a like, not a dropout from school, but that kind of ilk, gets himself in trouble, doesn't really seem to care, and then he comes across this other boy who's like very academic and cares a lot and is really obsessed with astronomy, and the 2 end up getting closer and it's kind of a grumpy sunshine vibe. They get closer, a romance ensues. I actually did really enjoy this, but it's not stuck with me in the way I would have liked it to, so I'm ending up giving it like a 3.5 star, somewhere in that region, because although it was a really enjoyable read at the time, it's definitely not really stuck in my head as much as I would like for a higher rating. But I will also say, as you will see throughout this video, I really struggle rating manga. I often get really into them when I read them, but given the length and the amount of story covered in each one, I really struggle to rate them. I've not figured out my rating system for manga yet. I just kind of am like, enjoyed, didn't enjoy, will continue, won't continue, and that's about as deep as it gets. And on that note, the next thing I read was another manga, Black or White Volume 4. So this series follows our 2 main characters who both work in the film industry. They've known each other since they were teenagers and both decided to try and be actors in the film industry. And, you know, throughout this series, one starts off more successful and then we see the success of the other grow. And the 2 of them are, towards the beginning of the series, basically realising there is a romantic attraction there. They've known each other for years, they've lived together for years, and they're both coming to terms with the fact that it is not entirely platonic. And then as the series progresses, that then evolves into how do they keep this quiet in the industry, given the world they're in and the impact it would have on their image, and then the tension that creates, especially with other people in the industry possibly making moves on some of them because they don't know. It's all a little bit messy. There is some questionable stuff in this series. It's a bit of a theme of a lot of manga, I do find, of people don't necessarily act in relationships how I would like. And there's definitely been some questionable moments in this, but the series is improving. I will talk about it more when I talk about Volume 5 in a few books' time, but it's getting better. So I'm holding out hope that this series is just going to continue to improve and actually end up really, really fantastic. Next up, a book I read in my scavenger hunt vlog is The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schrafer. This is a YA kind of sci-fi, sci-fi really, following these two boys who are put on a spaceship to complete a rescue mission for one of them's sister. They are from like opposite societies. There's two main countries, I think, in this futuristic Earth, and they are very much like at war, at tension. They're not thrilled with each other, so they've put one of each society on this ship as like representatives, and it is them getting to know each other and learning to like work together and live together alongside a whole host of mysteries and weirdnesses going on this ship, and it then turns into a bit of a romance as well. This I really enjoyed. I have an entire vlog reading it, so I'll definitely link that down below, and I have a lot more detailed thoughts in that, but I did really enjoy this one. I was a bit skeptical at the beginning. It didn't kind of grab me straight away. It felt like a bit insta-lovey, which sometimes I struggle with, and I just felt like some depth and some like moments of getting to know each other were kind of missing. But it really picked up towards the middle and the end, and it had me completely gripped. I read it in like 2 days, and overall really enjoyable. 4-star read, really solid, would highly recommend if you want a quick YA that's also a little bit kind of challenging and definitely has a really interesting mystery aspect to it as well. Next up, another manga. I read Antiromance by Shoko Hidaka. This was an entirely random pickup. This was just one I saw in Forbidden Planet at some point and thought looked kind of interesting, so I picked it up. And I'm really glad I did, actually. I really enjoyed this one. So this follows two friends who've been friends for years and years and years since they were really young, and they've lived together for years and basically are now deciding whether to take the next step. So not wildly dissimilar to the beginning of Black or White. And I don't remember fully how this one ended because my memory is absolutely shocking and has only got worse over the last few years. But I did really, really enjoy this one, significantly more than a lot of the manga I've read, and I have looked up when the next volume's coming out. It's relatively soon, and I will be picking up the second one when it comes out. I'm unsure if it's an ongoing series or a duology. It's often really hard to find out for manga, but I thought this one was really beautifully written and laid out and just really hit a lot more than a lot of manga does, especially given the length of a first volume. So really enjoyed this one if you're looking for a sweet but again slightly challenging kind of boy love manga. I'd really recommend this one. Up next, I read At the End of the Matinee by Keiichiro Hirano. Really sorry if I said that wrong. This was, again, a slightly random pickup. I have mentioned this in my vlogs, but I went to an event for Pride, which was in a club, but the club had a bookstore attached, so I spent the evening in the bookstore and I bought this one. I, again, will laugh at myself that on a Pride night at a queer bookstore, I managed to pick up a book with a heterosexual romance. Not a mention of queerness anywhere in this book, so not quite sure how I managed that. But nonetheless, At the End of the Matinee follows a professional guitarist who is struggling a bit in his career and isn't really sure where to go next, and he meets this reporter via a connection, and basically it's a combination of a friendship and a romance and like finding your way and deciding what's best to do with your life. 90% of this I loved. It was very realistic, it was very sort of introspective and really interesting and really beautifully written, especially towards the beginning. I noticed it less as the book went on. There were some gorgeous quotes and such a big focus on music and artistry and having a passion for something, which are all things I love reading in books. So it started incredibly strong. There was a moment in the middle where someone basically sabotages some of the relationship, which was just really an unnecessary level of drama. However, how it resolved and how it was handled throughout the rest of the book was again very realistic and very nicely handled, so I can forgive it. I think as a whole, this is probably a 3.5, 4 star, so really solid, but not a new favourite. But nonetheless was just such a fun experience picking up a book in an entirely new environment and then reading it straight away. It's just always really, really good fun. After that, I went on to read Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is the Fairy Loot edition of Divine Rivals, which is, you know, absolutely stunning, sprayed edges, has gorgeous end papers, but the bit I really care about is the foiling under the dust jacket. I just think it's a really stunning edition, which is why I bothered to get this one on resale. And I picked this up, I was going to say almost entirely, not even that, entirely because of Lauren Fiction Tea on Instagram. She loves this book. She has gone on about this book repeatedly, and this, in many ways, is not the kind of book I would have thought I would love, and probably wouldn't have picked it up if not for her glowing and constant recommendation. So she's entirely to blame for this. And this follows two young people, I want to say they're like 17, 18, 19, somewhere in that range, who are working in a like newspaper office competing for the same role of columnist. And alongside this, in this kind of slightly fictional world, is a war is ongoing between some gods, and we end up sort of like following some of that war and having like wartime reporters and focusing on what it's like to be on the front line but not actively on the front line. Loads of interesting conversation in that. It is also a rivals to lovers romance, which, if I'm going to be honest, kind of carried this book. I loved the romance. I got really, really into that, but I also did love the discussions around like what it's like to be on a front line in a really difficult time and what that can feel like, etc. My one complaint with this book, as I've said in the vlog before, is I called it not long before the end that, given this is going to be a series, a big plot point would suddenly be introduced at the end just so you can continue the series, and that very much happened. It is an interesting plot point. I am probably going to continue reading it, but it slightly frustrated me that it really could have been a standalone that was just very introspective and very interesting, but they had to like jam in this big exciting YA plot at the end just to carry through to another book. Slightly frustrated me, but I will forgive it because the romance was great, the characters were great, the story was interesting, so I will continue the series. Which, fun thing, the second book release has been moved up like 4 months, so instead of it being like spring next year, it's like November, December this year, which is really cool. It means I'm much more likely to continue it because I can read it soon. Next up, I didn't know what to read, but I ended up reading Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. I've read all of Ali Hazelwood's release so far, at least the ones under this name. Has she written something under another name, or is that was Olivia Blake, ignore me. I've read all of Ali Hazelwood's releases. Loved the Hypothesis, kind of loved Love on the Brain but got frustrated by the ending. Really didn't love the short stories, and so gave this a go. And I think this is also going to sit at like a 3 star, unfortunately. I enjoyed it when I read it. I liked the dynamic between these two main characters, but it's definitely not stuck with me at all. Like, I don't really remember what happened in this book, and I don't really care to. I think overall plot synopsis, you are following in this a young-ish woman, I would imagine like mid-20s, and she is trying to progress in her career as a theoretical physicist, and there's this big bad evil guy who's an experimental physicist who hates theoretical physicists and like ruined their name years before. And somehow or other the two of them end up crossing paths. She also works professionally as a fake dater, fake girlfriend for people. It's how she like subsidizes her income because academia doesn't really pay well. And it's all just a bit messy, and these two are rivals in the sense of one's a theoretical physicist and one's an experimental physicist, except like it's a very one-sided rivalry. And I think that was kind of my thing throughout the whole book, is she was really attached to not liking this guy, and he was just like over it so quickly and just happy to move on with their lives. And I was kind of like, girl, get a grip, come on, like just move on, like does it matter that much? But anyway, it was a good fun read. It had some very, very lovely moments in it, and I definitely felt the relationship, which was really nice. But as a whole, it's not a particularly hard-hitting book that has had a huge impact on me. It's a fun, quick read. I'm glad to have read it. I'm happy for it to end there. Next up, we have the final manga I read in July, which I'm holding upside down, Black or White Volume 5. I'm not going to give you the synopsis again, but I will say this is the best volume I've read in this series so far. I own Volume 6 as well. I am terrified to read it because what if it doesn't hold up or the plot gets ruined again? And I could definitely see them going down quite a negative route in the next volume to kind of recreate some drama. So I'm nervous to continue, but I will do at some point. But volume 5, very good. I then actually returned to my TBR and picked up a book off it. Wow, go me. I read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This is a very interesting book following a woman in Newcastle who takes explicit photos of men she like scouts from the street. She sees someone, gives them her card and photographs them. And throughout this book, you're getting a combination of like seeing her story now and then seeing some flashbacks to her at like college and art school, and how her kind of style of photography has evolved over time, and how her personal relationship to it has evolved in that same sense, and how she's become more involved, less involved with the people she's using as subjects. It's all super interesting. And then alongside that, you just have a lot of personal stuff. So she's got quite an obsessive best friend. She's got some personality flaws, to say the least. There's some relationship stuff going on. And I don't know how to qualify the rest of this book other than weirdness. Just some straight up weirdness. Like, there were a few moments in this book where I was like, I actually don't know what I'm reading. And I think that's kind of the point. It's surrealist. You're not really meant to be sure what's true and what isn't. But it caught me entirely off guard. I had not expected that aspect of this book at all. So this was an enjoyable read. It was an interesting read. I have no idea how to rate it because I genuinely don't know how I feel about it, because it just caught me so off guard, and there were so many different parts of this book with the photography and the friends and the relationships and the weirdness. And I liked some and I didn't like others. And so it's a bit of a maelstrom of I don't really know how I feel, but probably like a 4. Like, good, better than average, but like a 4, I think. I then read definitively my favourite book of the month, which was True Biz by Sarah Novick. I love this book. This book follows 3 people, February, August and Charlie. February is a sort of middle-aged woman who works as the headmistress of this deaf school where this book is set. And what's really interesting about this book is each of these 3 main characters have very different interactions and experiences with the deaf community and deaf culture. So February is hearing but grew up in a deaf family. August is deaf and grew up in a deaf family, and Charlie is deaf but grew up in a hearing family. So they've kind of got a few different areas going on. They've had different experiences in life. There's a lot of discussion around within the deaf community use of sign language versus cochlear implants versus like how the world wider perceives deafness and how they've treated deaf people in the history of that. And there was so much interesting content crammed into this alongside just a truly riveting interpersonal plot. So what I loved is this wasn't trying to be a non-fiction. This isn't like a book to take you through everything you need to know about deafness in America and the community and the culture. But loads of that was interwoven in a really helpful way to give you a load of context for what you're reading and a chance to educate yourself. But none of that detracted from like actually just a really interesting plot as well. It was the perfect balance of the two. I loved it wholeheartedly. I personally just have always found sign language absolutely fascinating as a language. I think it's so interesting how it's constructed in comparison to spoken languages, and it's something I would love to learn one day. I understand why this book teaches you a lot of ASL, American Sign Language. Understandably, it's a book set in America, written by an American author. However, really wish there was like BSL that I could learn, but that's fine. I'll just take the initiative to go learn it myself. But yeah, I love this. It's got rebellion, it's got romance, it's got a bit of everything you could want, and it's beautifully written and so interesting, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. The final book I have finished in July is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This is a book I've been reading for weeks and weeks and weeks, very slowly, mainly when I'm travelling. It's been an ebook, and I really enjoyed this. This is a book which is very commonly compared to The House in the Cerulean Sea, and I can see why, but honestly, I think in some ways I actually preferred it. I say that having not read House in the Cerulean Sea in many years, but this follows Mika, who is a sort of woman in her 20s, 30s, who is a witch, and she was raised by another witch, but it's well known that witches will always lose their parents at a very early age, and witches can never be around each other for long periods of time because it's too risky. They can't risk getting found out. Magic doesn't behave well when there's lots of them together. Lots of messy things. So Mika's lived a very isolated life and is very scared of forming connections because there's too much risk involved. And towards the beginning of this book, she gets a random message basically saying, like, I think you're a witch, I need your help. And this message comes from an older gentleman who is living with his husband and some other kind of found family members and 3 young girls who are witches who need a teacher. And he invites Mika to come and help them learn how to be witches because they don't have that influence in their life. And it is an absolutely gorgeous found family story. There is cute animals, there's sweet children, there is the most phenomenal discussion of like what it feels like to find home for the first time. And then alongside all of this, there is one of my favourite romances I think I've ever read. I really, really loved it. It was a gorgeous book. I enjoyed it so greatly. I think I'm going to give it a 4-star, which I realise feels slightly disingenuous given the compliments I'm showering on it. But that's entirely my own fault. I read it over so many weeks that I don't think it hit quite as hard as it could have, and there were definitely bits that I forgot between reads because it would often be a couple weeks between reading certain chapters. That's on me, but nonetheless it did tint my reading experience, but I highly recommend it. It's really sweet but not saccharine, and just an absolutely gorgeous book that I greatly enjoyed. So those are the 12 books I've read. I'm attempting to play the stupid game of can I pick up the entire stack? Well, hey, there we go. Lots of books. The fact that I read that much in what's been a very busy month and I've been ill for part of it, who knows how that happened, but I'm very chuffed. I've had some really fantastic reads and just an overall banging reading month, and long may it carry on through August. Let's hope it happens. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave just a book stack emoji in the comments if you don't have anything else to say, and give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more content from me. But that is it for this video, so bye, I'll see you in the next one.